Previously, I made a video with the rather grandiose title of Automation is Inevitable. And I stand by that, but it's worth looking at what factors would need to be anticipated in its absence. What if I'm wrong about a fully automated future? Not in the sense of it being impossible according to the laws of physics, but in the sense that it's much further away than current expert projections suggest. What if we don't get high-level automation until 100 years from now, for example? This would create some problems, or more accurately, it would remove a solution to an upcoming problem that's already set in place. Our problem is that we are not having enough children to meet the replacement rate, meaning that if this continues for long enough, we'll develop a lopsided ratio of elderly dependents to young providers. Never mind the debt that has accrued to pay for the system and the lack of future taxpayers. In addition, various factors mean that a lot of our youth are jobless anyway or have poor prospects because of bad degrees. If you extrapolate population decline forward, you might think, oh well, it doesn't matter because we'll just have more space and resources per person, and at some point people will naturally start having more kids to compensate. And this is true, but the problem is that declining populations turn over their age pyramid at some point, as I've mentioned, and with fewer young people there'll be fewer workers, and the workers that there are will be less productive, and there'll be larger transfer payments needed to service the growing elderly. Considering that government debt is already sky high and pensions are expected to be in big trouble towards the middle of this century, you extrapolate severe population decline forwards and the results aren't smooth and gentle, because once you cross certain thresholds you risk economic decline and even collapse eventually, and once a certain bulk of people are nearing their death but childless and with an economy unequipped to look after them, they'll all die in terrible conditions. If you think old folks' homes are bad now, you won't want to see them under this scenario. So essentially there are three possibilities for the scenario of severe population decline without automation to take up the slack. 1. Economic collapse and a massive die-off of dependence. 2. Extreme natalist policies to encourage people to have kids before this happens, and it would have to be before this happens. 3. Import massive amounts of young migrants who may not be equipped to support the Western elderly anyway, nor want to. Even then, this is basically a disease of prosperity, and the immigrants would suffer the same problem on a delayed timescale. We would have to return to option number 2, whether we're the original population we are now, or some replacement population from foreign countries. The only difference is that number 3, which is being argued for on these terms right now, is causing massive political unrest in Europe. Magnify it by a few times and you have civil war, and then lots of people die anyway. So importing everyone young from countries that aren't yet experiencing severe decline isn't the answer. It would only create a propaganda coup and bring the far right to power. Ideally, I would like to see global population lowered, as it creates its own problems. High density means lack of freedom, and the sheer use of power needed to support global living standards contributes to climate change, which only feeds back to empower managerial bureaucracy. Furthermore, in a highly automated economy with a large class of people stuck on basic income and economically useless, the productive utility of extra humans becomes essentially zero, turning the welfare state into a zero-sum game, where each individual receives higher rations the fewer citizens there are in the country. However, on the flip side, sharp population decline is bad, because when you invert the age pyramid you start to get a populace that is less and less able to be economically productive and sustain itself, so population decline should be gradual, otherwise the results don't look good for dependents or the economy in general. If machines don't pick up the slack, then developed countries will see economic decline along with population decline, and pyramid schemes like pensions will collapse, health services will be short on staff, and retirement will become a thing of the past. If it continues, there'll be a relatively sudden die-off of elderly people and dependents at some point. There'll be no longer enough people to look after them directly, or to keep the economy productive enough in order to do so in resource terms. If that was the scenario, then extreme natalist policies would probably be put in place to encourage people to have children at above replacement rate. You'd have to incentivise birth, discourage abortions, ban the pill and so on. And the more finely you cut it time-wise, the more extreme and traditionalist the natalist agenda would have to be, destroying any possibility for gender equality under the law. No one outside of a fringe wants this today, at least in Northern Europe. I don't want this, so I hope that whatever problems may await, that the AI Renaissance fulfills its promises within this century.